Introduction to communication. In this video, why communication breaks down and what to do about it. Have you ever met someone, felt an instant connection and spent the next maybe several hours talking about everything and nothing at all? Or have you ever met someone and just not connected on any level and maybe even having an instant dislike for them? One reason this can happen is when you meet someone who either has the same communication style as you or someone who has a very different style. Now, think of how that kind of connection might affect your connection with your market, and how can you control that connection? Has someone ever misunderstood something that you said or wrote, and then, when you pointed out the error, they seem to hear a confirmation that they were correct the first time? That results in some crazy, almost argument about something you didn't even say. Well, welcome to the world of communication breakdown. Now here's how to fix that. But first, what most likely went wrong? We're all experts at communicating. Well, we think we are. We know exactly what we meant. The meaning was obvious. So why the misunderstanding? There's a thing called a communication cycle, and we all have different speeds for that cycle. We use different words called predicates. We have different tonality and indeed a different expectation. Now let's explore these in a little more detail. First, the easy one, tonality. Different ways of saying the same word can change its meaning. Imagine a young kid being offered another dessert or the latest, greatest new game. You want this? Yeah! Now think of explaining your absence to a suspicious spouse. You ask, "You do believe me, don't you?" And you get the response, "Yeah." Now that's the same word, but it has a very different meaning. One says, "Yes, absolutely," and the other says, "Keep going, I'm not sure yet." Now the written word is particularly susceptible. When you read what you typed, you hear it in your voice. When they read it, they hear it in their voice. And as we just demonstrated, different tonality, different voice, can change the meaning. Which is why you need to make it sound like the first time, every time. You probably have your own way of explaining your offer, and you've said it what feels like a gazillion times. But it's the first time your customer has heard it. If you sound bored with it, then you lose most of the message. And this is why we're told, smile even when you're on the phone. The other person can hear it. Become aware of and learn to control the tone of your voice, and your message will be delivered with far better results. Have you ever considered an offer, agreed with someone, and then listened to them try to convince you again, leaving you thinking, well, you've only got to convince me once, or, well, let's move on and discuss the next step rather than something that's already been decided? That's the communication cycle, getting out of sync. Here's a very quick description of the communication cycle and how you can leverage it. Here's a quick introduction to the communication cycle. Person A is speaking, and so their focus is internal on the message that they're delivering. At that point, person B is listening, so their focus is external, as it should be. At a point in time, person A stops talking and they expect an answer, so their focus switches to external. At that point, when the speaking stops, person B evaluates what was said. So A is expecting a response, but nothing seems to be happening. If B takes longer to evaluate than A thinks is appropriate, they start thinking about how to better explain it So their focus switches back to internal, and immediately they explain it again. But at that point, B finally responds in agreement. Their focus goes back to external. Now what's happened at step 3? Person A doesn't hear person B agree because their focus at that point was internal. A then explains it again and B wonders why, since they just agreed when person A said it the first time. You need to understand that there are different speeds and acknowledge what has been said. For example, you can repeat part. So what you're saying is, or you can ask for additional time without really asking for additional time. Something like, that's a great question and it prompts a number of thoughts. Can I just confirm? Or even just nod your head, especially if yours is the slower cycle. Be aware of the relative speed. Are you and the person you are talking to communicating at the same speed or managing to confuse each other? Speed up or slip your gears to get in step with the other person and watch your connection with that person improve in an instant. You've probably heard, we don't describe things as they are, we describe things as we are. If you know what to listen for, you can actually hear this difference. But first, why would you want to do this? Well, in addition to the internal-external cycles getting out of sync and different tonalities, we each have a slightly different way of communicating, and those differences can cause miscommunication. Now you know what message you actually want to deliver, so fundamentally you've got two options. You can use your natural language and hope they understand it, or translate what you really mean into their language and know they will understand it. And it's not difficult if you practice a little. But guess what happens to your sales and profits when your market really understands the benefits that you can deliver to them? So that's why you need to be able to do all of this. Now here's how. Start by just listening. Now that doesn't mean standing mute while they try and attract your attention. It does mean that you listen to them on a more detailed level than you may be used to. How do they describe things? Do they say things like, looks good or sounds right? Maybe feels okay. Bright idea. Oh, that's short-sighted. Make music together. Loud and clear. Hey, we can tap into this. Pull some strings. Be your normal part of the conversation and become aware of the kinds of words that they use to describe things. Now what they're really doing is describing how they represent the world, what their internal map is like, and it also gives you a key to better communication and unlocking their motivation to buy from you. See, people tend to use words that are from the same group. So where one person says, oh, I see what you mean, another might say, I hear what you're saying, and yet another, oh, I've got a good feeling about this. One single word does not indicate their preference, but repeated use of words from the same group, by the way that's called a predicate, does. Now this is only a quick introduction to the topic, but if you start listening to and become aware of other people's speech patterns, in particular your potential clients, and you implement what I'm about to share, then you already know enough to improve your sales success rate. What do you do next? When you're in a conversation with someone else, start by just listening and get used to listening at the more detailed level and identifying predicates. After you've finished the conversation, identify that person's representation model. What predicates, what kind of predicates do they use most often? And once you can do that, figure out how you could have delivered your message in their predicate language. Now you'll eventually develop skills to be able to convert your message into other predicates during the conversation. And again, start with just one translation and build from there. Next conversation, couple of times. One after that, 2 or 3, and so on. Done right, you will see a transformation in them as they really get that you understand them and their problem. Remember, marketing is all about being able to convince your market that you really understand their problem and that your solution is the best available for them. This has just been a brief introduction to accurate communication. But armed with just the information in this video, one student of mine sold more the next day than they had ever sold before in a week. And then they sold at that level for all of the week just to prove the first day wasn't a fluke. Now, I don't know how your sales will improve, but I do know that they will if you correctly implement these techniques. The next video has some more ideas on how to better communicate with your market.